Good morning, and thank you for joining us for our program today. We hope that you're having a good weekend and a blessed Lord's Day, and we invite you to worship with us at the Pyburn Street Church of Christ. We come together this morning at 9 o'clock for Bible study. We'll have classes available for all ages. Following our Bible study at 9:50, we will engage in a period of worship to our God. We also will come together this evening at 6 for evening worship, and then we gather on Wednesday evenings at 7 for Bible study. Please know that you're always welcome at the Pyburn Street Church of Christ. Many tributes deservedly can be paid to the patriarch Abraham. He is the source of several nations, including the nation which God called his own people. Peoples who trace their origin to Abraham still have a vigorous existence 4,000 years after his death, and they still maintain their identity. He was the father of kings and the father of persons who influenced the thinking and the course of the world. Three of the world religions trace their origins back to Abraham: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Of all of the tributes that justly can be bestowed upon Abraham, no tribute equals the one conferred upon him by God. This nomad, who lived a primitive existence as he wandered among foreign cultures, was capable of having a faith which God declared to be the Christian's model of faith. That remarkable accomplishment scarcely can be exaggerated, though. He produced that faith without the benefit of the written word. He had less revealed to him about God's plan for the redemption of mankind than any great man of God who followed him. Yet, it is this man, Abraham, who is the timeless example of the faith which God wants in his people. Not Moses, who led Israel out of Egypt and gave them the law. Not David, the man after God's own heart. Not Elijah, who was received up into heaven without experiencing death. Not Isaiah, who in evil, distressing times was willing to make the statement, "Here am I, send me," Isaiah 6 and verse 8. Incredibly, this patriarch, who possessed so little information about God and his purposes, trusted God in a manner which cannot be surpassed by those who have the knowledge of history and revelation. The Christian's understanding of God's promise to produce a universal blessing through Abraham far exceeds Abraham's understanding. The Christian knows the full meaning of the promise, knows the ultimate fulfillment of that promise was fulfilled in the death and resurrection of Jesus, and knows the ultimate objective was the opportunity for all people to have salvation in Christ. We have the written word. We can see God working through history to keep that promise. Yet, the best any Christian can hope to do is equal the faith of Abraham. God's purpose began to take its earliest earthly form in Abraham because he was capable of having a faith which God could reckon for righteousness. It is that same faith which will allow the Christian to be righteous before God. The New Testament pays great tribute to Abraham, this great man of faith. His name appears 30 times in the Gospels, 8 times in the book of Acts, and 32 times in the epistles. When a New Testament writer wanted to teach a lesson on the nature or the importance of faith, Abraham was the model that they used. When Paul taught about the righteousness which exceeds through faith, Abraham was the model which he used in Romans chapter 4. When Paul taught that all people became the heirs of God's promises through Abraham, Abraham was the foundation of the lessons presented in Galatians 3. In Hebrews, the roll call of the people of faith, one section pays tribute to Abraham's sojourning and another to his offering of Isaac in Hebrews chapter 11. When James taught that obedient works were the natural expression of a living faith, Abraham's faith was the primary evidence that was used in James chapter 2. When a Christian properly understands Abraham's faith, which was reckoned for righteousness, he will understand the faith which will allow him to be righteous before God. It will be possible to gain that understanding by examining the development of Abraham's faith. Abraham started out in a place known as Ur of the Chaldees. In the city of Ur, a rich, highly developed culture predated life there. Over 600 years before Terah and his family arrived in Ur, the city was a Sumerian royal city and a center of that culture. Excavations of the royal tombs of the first dynasty revealed impressive evidences of the wealth and the artistic refinement of this city. God's request to Abraham to migrate from Ur was not a small request. Abraham's leaving Ur would be like a person leaving a city which was prosperous, was filled with opportunity, and provided safety and security. But Genesis chapter 11, verses 27 through 32, gives us the following facts about Abraham and the city of Ur. Haran, who was Abraham's brother, died while they were living in Ur. This is known as this land of nativity, where Abraham grew up. And before the family left the city of Ur, in verse 28 of Genesis chapter 11, we see that Haran had already passed away. Abraham married Sarah while they were in Ur, and they lived there long enough for her barrenness to be established prior to their departure. But Terah took his family away from Ur, and they left to go into the land of Canaan. And Terah led this migration from Ur toward the land of Canaan. However, the migration stopped. They did not reach this intended destination. They settled in a place called Haran, a place which held many things in common with the city of Ur, as evidenced by verse 31. Two other passages give insights into God's call of Abraham at Ur. In his final address, Joshua declared to Israel that Terah and their fathers of old times served other gods beyond the river. If beyond the river is to be identified with Ur, Joshua declared that Terah and his family served pagan gods prior to God's call of Abraham. In Stephen's sermon before the Jewish council, he declared that God's call to Abraham in Ur was the same call which Abraham received a second time in Haran. He was to leave his land, to leave his kindred, and go to a land which God would show him. Acts 7, verses 2 and 3. If all the pieces of information are assembled, this would seem to be the situation when God called Abraham at Ur. Abraham was under the guidance and the oversight of the family head, Terah. Religiously, they were polytheistic. Abraham married his half-sister, who proved to be incapable of conceiving a child. God told Abraham then to leave Ur, to leave his extended family and go to a place which God would show him. Abraham understood his general destination to be the land of Canaan, and he believed the message which he received from God and accepted the responsibility. He had sufficient faith to forsake the pagan gods for the guidance of the God who had called him. He had sufficient faith to leave Ur and its advantages. He had sufficient faith to migrate in the direction which God desired. However, he either would not leave the oversight of Terah, or Terah would not permit him to leave the family and his oversight. It's possible that Terah forbade Abraham to leave without the family. Rather than allowing Abraham to leave the family behind, Terah may have decided that the family were going to travel with Abraham. But two facts might indicate this. Terah took the family on a journey, indicating that he was in charge, Genesis 11 and verse 31. The call to Abraham was not renewed by God, though, until Terah had passed away. Considering all the circumstances, Abraham had great faith while he was in Ur, a faith which led him to accept the guidance of God and to migrate to a new home hundreds of miles away. However, at this point, Abraham did not have the faith that reckoned for righteousness. Well, after the death of Terah in Haran, God renewed his call to Abraham. Terah's position as head of the family may have been a formidable obstacle to Abraham's fulfilling God's call. It is implied that under Terah's leadership, the family had settled and established itself in Haran. Abraham was 75 years old and Sarah was 65 when God renewed his call, and these same requests were made. Abraham was to leave his country, which now was Haran, to leave his kindred, those who had migrated with him to Haran, and those who had been born there, to leave his father's house, and to go to a land which God would show to him. In doing so, Abraham was to be a blessing. In return, God would make Abraham a great nation, would bless him, would make his name great, would bless those who befriended him, would curse those who were his enemies, and would bring a blessing to all families of the earth through him. Now, God's requests represented major challenges to Abraham's faith. First, he had to sever his ties with his kinsmen. There are many today who will not leave family ties behind for any reason. Second, he had to sever his tie with the place that he was familiar with, his home, those familiar things, those customs, those roots that he had established there. Likewise, there are many today who have a very powerful bond with the place where they live, and they will not sever that bond for any reason. Third, he had to leave the known and follow after the unknown. God gave him no description of his destination. Abraham knew nothing about where he would be or how long he would be there, and there are few who would make a move today with so little information. Fourth, he had to trust in God's ability to protect him and his people. In that time, it was not safe for a man of wealth to live as a foreigner among strange people. And many people today, likewise, would be hesitant to place their security solely in the hands of God. And fifth, he had to believe that God actually could cause his barren wife to conceive. The key factor in God's ability to keep his promises was his ability to enable Sarah to bear a child. If Sarah did not conceive and bear a child, there could be no great name, there could be no nation, no descendants to possess the land, and no blessings to come upon the families of the earth. The pivotal point of all the promises was Sarah's ability to bear Abraham a son. Now, in this situation, Abraham possessed and exhibited a remarkable faith. He did leave his family ties. He left his position with the family. There's no indication that his taking Lot violated God's request, since Lot's father had died in Ur and Terah had died in Haran. It's probable that Abraham was Lot's guardian at this point, and that Lot was considered a part of Abraham's immediate family. Abraham also left the known security of Haran for an unknown destination. He did travel to Canaan, and he did trust God to protect him. However, Abraham's trust was not perfect. When a famine forced Abraham to travel to Egypt, he feared that the Egyptians would kill him in order to marry his beautiful wife Sarah. And he told the Egyptians only that she was his sister, and deliberately hid the fact that she was his wife, Genesis 12, verses 10 through 20. We also have the instance where God told him that he was going to have a child, and when it was realized that Sarah was barren, Sarah took her handmaid Hagar and gave her to Abraham, with whom he bore a child by the name of Ishmael. But God rejected this plan. When Sarah was trying to help God out of a difficulty, she perceived that this was the appropriate course to take. But God told Abraham that this child of promise was going to come from Sarah, was not going to come through Hagar. Ishmael was not going to be this child of promise. Isaac would come to be this child of promise. And with the conception and the eventual birth of Isaac, Abraham's faith in God was solidified. God proved to him that he could trust in the Lord. He could trust those promises that God makes. But Abraham's faith in God was great. But yet it was still not the faith which God reckoned for righteousness. It was not until Abraham placed his full trust in the Lord, until he acted upon the things which God instructed him to do and believed wholeheartedly that God was guiding him in the right ways, and he surrendered his will for God's will. Then and only then was Abraham's faith reckoned for righteousness. Friends, we need to follow the example of Abraham today. Whatever it is that God asks us to do in His Word, it may not always be pleasant. It may not always be what we want to do at that initial moment. But we must understand that what God has set forth for us to do is what we must do if we want to be pleasing to Him, if we want to live that life of faithful, obedient service unto Him, and we want heaven to be our home when this life comes to an end, then we must have a faith that is reckoned for righteousness. Friends, we thank you for joining us for our program today, and may God bless you with a wonderful Lord's Day.